Hello and welcome to Dungeoneered, a podcast dedicated to discussing Dungeons and Dragons. I'm Aaron.
And I'm Josh.
Let's do it. So, I've been doing a lot of thinking about our world that we're kind of creating and how it's kind of very heavily relating to and dealing with magical issues that are occurring in the world. So, disappearing of magic, people wanting to bring magic into a higher capacity. And so I kind of wanted for the Lukewarm Open to jump into a magical setting and how we kind of think about creating a magical setting, because there's a lot of different settings you can choose in D&D. And, you know, one of them is a high fantasy, high magic setting, and another is even a no magic setting. So when creating a magical setting, what's kind of the first thing you start to think of? Because, you know, what's the first thing you start to break down when talking about creating a magical setting?
I always think of Brandon Sanderson.
Nice. I love Brandon Sanderson. One of my favorite authors.
Do. He has a whole bunch of tips on writing and world building, and most of them are fantastic. I can't say all of them are fantastic because I have not watched them all, so I do not want to verify that they're all fantastic.
I have watched many a lecture of Brandon Sanderson on his world building and all sorts of stuff like that, and they're awesome. So anybody wanting to listen to something like that, they should, because they're super great. Yeah.
So he was talking about so I was watching, it was a YouTube video about magic and world building, and they used this clip of one of his lectures to kind of talk about it. And they were saying that they were specifically looking at Skyrim in this video, and they were saying how Skyrim has all of these magics that don't, like, it wouldn't make sense that the world would work the way it does if this magic existed. And Brandon Sanderson in his thing was like, hey, it's much better to have 3 spells that you super duper duper look at how this would affect the world than to have 1,000,000 spells.
And so that's 100% true.
Yeah, and so that's what I always look at. I go through the whole spell list in D&D and be like, how would these change the world? If we had, like, even going as simply as like Cure Wounds. If this existed, how would the world look differently? If this was super prevalent, everybody had access to this, what would happen?
Right.
And I'm like, okay, it would become an industry. There wouldn't be what we think of as hospitals. There would be places where you just go, pay some money, and then get yourself healed in an instant almost, or sometimes an hour, sometimes 2 hours, and then you're already done.
Right. Same with, like, removing diseases. Like, paladins only have to spend 5 lay on hands points, and they can cure any disease that they wish.
Yeah.
You know?
And then you have to think about, if that is the case, if it's that easy to get things cured and healed, there's going to be a huge lack of death. Like, part of how our world works is that there's not overpopulation at times because people die of old age or of a disease or of a thing. And so because of all these deaths, the world is kind of kept at this. I mean, it's still expanding. We're still constantly getting more and more people, but it's a slower rate. But that would not happen in this other world. It would be a much faster rate that there would be more people introduced in the world, and people would not be leaving it at a fast rate.
Right.
That would lead to using up of resources to the point where they're not going to have as much. But then there's also spells that come into place, like create food and water. So then that becomes not a problem. Then you have to think about, it's only the material stuff that would be a problem. Then you'd have to think about how transmutation would allow that to be fulfilled anyways. And it just spirals and spirals and spirals.
Yeah, so my question then, building off of this, is do you think D&D suits a high magic setting very well?
Yeah.
Yeah?
I mean, so? I think it's fine to do it with D&D, or with, like, it's fine to do it. And that's what D&D is made for, is doing the thing that you want in it.
Yeah,
but I think it is really hard because of how many spells exist, but I also think that the game wouldn't be as fun if there wasn't as many spells.
Right. I don't know. I have a really hard time with high magic settings in D&D. Not number of spells, I guess, more so, but the access to those spells, because it just takes so many, like, world issues that you could have and makes them very trivial. I mean, for example, like a plague or a disease, if you had 10 clerics in a town, all who could cure disease, and a couple paladins, then, over the course of a few days, you could do a significant, work on any kind of disease, just by completely eliminating it. So,
well, here's how that would go. In our world, the reason why diseases and stuff are hard to cure is because they mutate and change. What if they mutate and change to the point where magic is suddenly not working, or you need a higher level spell so you don't have the right level of clerics or paladins around to stop that? You have to call.
That could be an interesting take for sure.
Yeah.
I've never even thought about that.
So they're still mutating. They're just mutating and changing around magic itself, or magic is affecting them, and now it's not a disease, it's a magical curse. A disease has turned into that.
Yeah, like you can't.
The spell I hate the most in D&D is Remove Curse. I hate it so much because the curses can be so much fun to try and remove. Like, oh, you got to go and get the bone of a Tarask and a yada 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 and do all these things, and like that is fun. And the fact that there's a spell that just says, nah, screw all that. No extra story here.
It's all gone. Yeah. I mean, I know there are some curses that say like can only be removed by a wish spell or something like that, right? I know that's a thing. But I, kind of along those lines, I have the same problem with, cure diseases, even like create food and water. Cause like if somebody has access to that, say you're like 5th level, right? 6th level, then like food and water just becomes like not a thing that's really important because you can just easily, create it, or which, does take up resources, casting the spell. But,
and it's also, if you're only the level that can just barely cast it, you're taking up your highest level spell slot.
Right. For sure. But it's just kind of those things that can be so interesting in a D&D setting or any setting, become kind of trivial, really, really quickly and really fast when magic becomes kind of accessible to people.
See, I start thinking of it as the problems they have to deal with from early on have to be bigger. That's how I think of it. Instead of thinking of it as, oh, well, I can't do these little things anymore. I think everything they're going to have to deal with is going to be on a big scale because everybody, even the villains, have magic.
Yeah, for me, it's not so much that it becomes trivial to the players, but it becomes trivial to the world. So, depending on the access, the world just kind of feels like, it's these little problems are trivial. And I don't have a problem with that with players. It's really fun to see the progression from level 1, we're struggling with even buying rations to get us, to the next town, right? All the way to level 20 where, who's keeping track of rations anymore? Nobody is. Who cares?
No need to think about how many arrows you got, that kind of stuff.
Exactly. Yeah, that progression's fine with me and is fun with me. Even to the point of like, a plant, like a living plant attacks you and you get sick from it or something, right? Or, get a disease from some sort of animal and you just immediately cure it, right? That's even fine to me. It's just the world feels way less impacted by many different types of events when you can just, boom, you're done, next, boom, you're done, next, So that's why in my worlds I tend to have a high magic setting in terms of the cap to magic. You can do all sorts of really fun and amazing things, but the amount of people who have access to that are very, very, very few, to the point where you go to a church and there's one person in that church who can even cast cure wounds, right? So it just, I don't know. And it also takes away too, which is another problem. It takes away kind of like the player agency of feeling like powerful when you start giving people access to this much magic. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. It's kind of a hard thing.
I understand what you're saying there, and I kind of agree with that. But the thing is, I in my high magic worlds, I don't think of that as everyone has access to high level magic. I think of that as everyone has a little bit of magic. In like other worlds, Farmer Joe does not have magic. In my world, Farmer Joe has a cantrip like Druidcraft that helps his plants grow a little bit better. Not super better, but a little bit.
Yeah, but I mean, like, even so, if I were to do a high magic setting, it would be exactly that. Like, people have maybe access to some cantrips and maybe some like mediocre enchanting or whatever, but or maybe like carts are pulled by magic instead of horses and things like that. Might be interesting. And I would even have societies within a not a high magic world that maybe even can do stuff like that. But it has to kind of stay at the cantrip level, because otherwise, even going into first level and second level spells, it's like immediately we take a pretty big jump in power level for not so much in like damage or like attacking spells, but just the utility spells that first level provides. Even things like comprehend languages, like a high level magic society, everybody can, a bunch of people can, everyone can read any book that they could possibly want, which could be fun. But it's just, there's a lot of things that I think that we would end up like just completely ignoring and not make it a world as interesting because everyone can do magic. But even with like basic cantrips, like people don't have to light torches anymore, so that makes sneaking into a castle at night much harder because there's no torch changes. There's no like lights are just on all the time.
First level spell alarm,
right? Yeah, like there's an alarm around the entire castle because it's a high magic setting, and it would be something that somebody would do. Like
so the guards who have to guard that area just cast alarm on their sector and.
And it makes a heist, really difficult. So, and those are really fun things to do when a party's like 6th level and it's a difficult heist and there's alarms and things.
Yeah, and they have dispel magic and they have things to get around it.
But right, when it's a high magic setting and everybody has access to this, the players really kind of get dwarfed really quick. And then there's just so many things that you have to take into account thinking about a world when it's like, oh well, they'd probably have an alarm, or they'd probably have unseen servants. They'd have familiars scouting around. They'd have, so that's kind of my issue with high magic setting. But yeah I think that's not where 100% wanted to go, but I think we're probably ready to move on to the topic. I wanted to go a little bit deeper into that and dive into like making characters and magical, like people who have magic. But I think that's a good place to stop.
Yeah, we can always jump into that next week. I will say that my next campaign I'm already creating is, and I've already had 5 sessions in, is high magic.
Yeah, I'm really interested in making a high magic setting for D&D. I just have to wrap my brain around how I want to do it.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is I think the simplest way I can sum it down is you have to think of problems differently. But also I think the like political stuff won't change at all.
No,
because it's not like, hey, we can just trample over this other nation now, because you both have the high tech, high magic people in your armies.
Yeah, I don't see, I definitely don't see political stuff changing much. Maybe in terms of like political assassinations and coups and stuff might be a little bit different, but even then, it's not really going to change too much. It's just the day-to-day things that can make D&D really interesting kind of fall by the wayside, and you really have to, and what you were saying in the beginning, where you really have to go through the D&D spell list and really look at them and be like, how would this, if people have access to these first level spells, right, or even just cantrips, how much would it change the world? Like a lot, probably. So
yeah, one of my first things that I did in my new world is I made roads are for peasants.
Yeah.
Anybody if you see someone traveling the road, they're either a peasant, a bandit, or going somewhere that most people don't go, aka they don't have a teleportation circle. Right, the majority of places have teleportation circles, and they have the corresponding teleport to another place.
Yeah, you could even go as far as, maybe, I guess this is a lesser extent, but you could even just do like walking is for peasants. Like people who, peasants are the ones that walk because they don't have the access to like being able to float or riding carriages that float, or, like you could even do something like that, which would be really
in doing
fun,
so,
where people walking.
Like if you go on the roads, it's dangerous because the only people are going to be there are peasants or bandits.
Right. Yeah. So
the roads are also not
there's a lot of fun. there's a lot of untapped fun to be had in a really high magic setting for D&D. I just have a really hard time wrapping my brain around how I'd want to do it without, like, taking problems that we would have in real life and relate to in real life and just be very trivial. So,
well, maybe I'll have to pull you in as a one-shot character here or there. Show you my world.
Yeah, that'd be fun. I would do it in a heartbeat. I would love to do it.
Well, let's
all right.
traverse through our portal from that topic.
Heck yeah.
So this week, I kind of moved around my topic a little bit. I was trying to find what to talk about, and I found something, and then I researched that, and I'm like, I'm going to make it a little broader. And so I added a few other things into the topic.
Oh, okay.
So this topic I'm going to talk about is a god or a greater god and his exarchs. Exarchs are like powerful chosen beings granted almost the power of a demigod by a greater deity. Some even go on from there to become their own god because once they reach a certain power level in the Forgotten Realms, they just need to do a ritual to contact the kind of over god and say, hey, like, this is the domain I want. I have this much power.
Behold.
Am I cool? And he'll say yay or nay. Just a hop,
skip, and a jump. Just a hop, skip, and the jump to the creator of the world. Not a big deal.
Oh no, it's a complicated ritual for sure. Only,
I'm sure. Yeah.
Well, we are specifically going to be talking about the Greater Faerunian deity Tempus and his exarchs.
Tempus, Tempest or Tempus?
Tempus, Tempus.
Oh, okay, Tempus.
Tempus is the greater god of war, known as the Lord of Battles. He focuses on honorable battles and encouraging the force of arms to settle disputes.
Quick question before we continue. What are your thoughts on, like, deity domains, especially when it relates to domains of war? Do you think they're, like, interesting? Do you think they're boring?
I like the idea of this thing gets power based on how much of this happens. And they sort of have control over this thing. So I like domains.
Yeah, I like domains too. I don't know. I find, like, I guess kind of relating back to what we were talking about earlier in Lukewarm Open, but, like, domains just get really boring. I don't know. I like to try and spice things up, but it's just really hard to wrap your brain around a different type of domain besides, like, domain of war, domain of battle, domain of courage, domain of bravery, like domain of death. But I mean, I guess, again, in a world, people would be worshiping things like that. That's how domains would be formed. So
yeah, like I like what we've done for season 4, how we have the gods were literally created from the brains of people just thinking them up. And then once they have solidified, then they pretty much every time somebody tries to worship a god of that domain, they run over and say, hey, I exist.
I wonder what a world without those type of domains would look like. Like if you just had nebulous gods that didn't have domains.
Okay, well, I mean, this is something really interesting, and this will be season 5. Season 5, that's what we have to create. You write it down. Write it in your many extensive notes.
Continue, please. Domain of war, something about that.
Yes. Tempus was not just immediately the greater deity of war. Like, he wasn't that way from the beginning of time. Originally, he was one of many demigods that had a domain that was similar to war, but it wasn't exactly war. These gods then fought. And every time you would defeat a god of another domain, you would get their portfolio. Eventually...
Get their LinkedIn profile?
Eventually, Tempus won out as the god of war, destroying all but one of his enemies. And one of his enemy, he made into his exarch, Garagos. I thought I was going to screw up that pronunciation. That actually went really well. I'm really proud of myself there.
That sounded That sounded pretty good. Like that sounded like it was an actual name. There's some
Yeah.
where I'm kind of like, but that one sounded pretty good.
Despite him making him his exarch, Garagos still hated Tempus because he defeated him. The deity Tempus was a fickle and chaotic deity, distributing favors seemingly randomly. In war, he would give different sides benefits based on how he was feeling that day. It was less to say that he would abandon one side or the other based on his whim. It's more like he liked both sides equally. So he'd bless both of them at different times. His dogma was simply three things: be fearless, never turn away from a fight, and finally, obey the rules of war.
Obey the rules of war. Did he create those?
No, I think it's kind of just like the ones that we have an idea of what fair war is like. Now, because people didn't live up to that, we have now written out the Geneva Convention.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Saying, for sure, this is what we believe good war is.
Yeah.
Fair war.
Good war. Yeah. Fair war is a better. I think.
Yeah.
Better. Well,
as soon as I said it, I'm like, that's not right. That's not the right word.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of like moral things in the Geneva Convention, like don't kill your own citizens with gas bombs and stuff. But like,
yeah, don't fire upon the citizens of another nation. Like you can't you can't attack just a civilian target.
Just can't. Yeah, you can't wipe out an entire group of people.
Yeah. Tempus held his divine realm, the warrior's rest, and his exarchs and demigods resided in this plane. But this plane would not allow anyone to die inside of it. Instead, they would just wait until their wounds healed, and then they would stand back up. True death in this realm.
Repeat that. Wait, what?
So this is a constant. This is a realm of the war god. So they have a lot of war.
Okay,
but nobody is allowed to die here.
Got it. That's what I thought.
So if you get knocked
they
down,
can just fight endlessly.
Yes.
Endlessly.
So if you get knocked down to when you would die. It's pretty much like when you go unconscious but you stabilize in D&D. So
yeah,
you go down with one hit with 0 hit points. Then in an hour you wake up with 1.
Boy, that'd be fun to have a fun little like one shot thing in a God of War plane.
But you're not allowed to tell them that they can't die here until they die.
Yeah.
Now, the true death was reserved for those who broke the rules in this realm. So those who were cowards and fled from battle. Not my wording. I just want to say that. And those who brought dishonor upon themselves in combat.
Dishonor on you, dishonor on your cow.
Yes.
Anyways, continue.
Despite his domain being so wide and affecting every deity, he didn't have many other connections to the other deities of his pantheon. He had a friend here, a friend there, but nothing major. No alliances, no enemies, almost indifference.
That's kind of weird for a god of war.
Yeah. Well, so that's the thing.
Well, maybe not.
He is a god of war, but he is a god of like honorable war. He's not a god of rage and just war for war's sake. He's a god of war. If you have a dispute, go to war about it, but not like go to war for nothing.
You would just think like the
conquest
god of,
is not.
I guess the god of peace like wouldn't hate the god of war because they're all about peace, So they couldn't do that.
Well, I think the god of asparagus really had a problem with him, but the god of peas was fine with him.
Okay, stop. Okay, get out of here. Get out of here. Keep going. I'm done with you.
Got him.
Goodness.
So now we shall dive into the history of his exarchs. He has 4 main exarchs. The Red Knight, a demigod of battle tactics and strategy.
It's starting to make sense.
What is?
outside joke. We're talking beforehand. You talked about this a little bit.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that makes sense now. Valkyr, a lesser deity of ships, sailors, and naval combat. Garagos, a demigod of destruction and plundering. Pretty much a god of the frenzy barbarian is what you'll find out is pretty much what it is.
Okay.
And Uthgar, the demigod of physical strength.
I swear I've heard that name before. Have we talked about that guy before?
Nope.
Or mentioned him somewhere?
Nope.
Man.
I mean, Uthgar is just a common Nordic name.
Yeah.
So you could have heard it in other fantasy or other mythologies or something.
Just some reason it's like ringing a bell. Uthgar. Ah, I know what it's from. I know exactly what it's from.
What is it?
Uthgerd the Unbroken is a companion you can have in Skyrim. She's in the tavern in Whiterun that you beat up and punch, and then if you beat her up, then she becomes your follower. That's who I'm thinking of. Okay. Continue.
Interesting. These four were each brought into Tempus's domain in their own way. Garagos, as I discussed previously, was one of the demigods that he had to fight to gain all his domains. But he was the only demigod that was spared. He was actually a deity from the Netherese Pantheon, where he was known as Targus. But he was spared by Tempus, and no one truly knows why, but it was suggested that the idea and... Oh, I lost my place. That the idea and domains Garagos controls of rage, destruction, and pillaging were unsightly to Tempus.
Yeah, you'd think they'd have a little bit of an issue, right?
And he didn't wish
that would be kind of a problem
to control them.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, so he didn't want to take over those domains, so he just left Garagos alive so that Garagos would never give up those domains.
Boy, but here's the question. Is that honorable to do that?
He thinks so.
Yeah, apparently. Apparently.
So he made Garagos a servant, and of a servant of his, despite Garagos hating him. And he left him in his realm, the Warrior's Rest. Tempus, not liking Garagos, Tempus, not liking Garagos' domain, made sense, as Garagos was a bloodthirsty and frenzied god, loving violence for violence sake, and admiring and encouraging those who enter into a rage and destroy all in front of them, not caring if it's friend or foe.
You know what this makes me want to do? This makes me want to create a world where gods fight in a big arena in front of like normal people to earn followers. Like whoever can have the coolest and best fight and win over certain gods. That's how they gain faith. Be very, very interesting and very weird. But anyways, continue.
Okay. Put this down in your notes for season 5. Early, like, prehistory. It's the same. It's going to go under that same notes that you put previously. These gods don't have domains. Prehistory, they fight, and their battles are so world-shaking and changing that they shape the world with their fights. And in these fights, they win over the created beings that already live in the world.
Heck
so they're
yeah.
like, oh, this tribe loved
So
this guy. So they're not still fighting, but back then, that's how they shaped the whole world.
Yeah, I think I mean, even then, it would be fun to have them continue to fight. Like, it's a traditional religious ceremony now where the gods come down and they fight in a bigger arena.
Yeah, it might be like a ceremony now, like once a year or once every 10 years or something.
Yeah, that'd be so cool. And, like, you could, they prepared a festival for, the gods are going to come down and have a fight in the arena this year. You know, which society, which nation are they going to choose, you know? That'd be so interesting.
Oh, it's going to be the Olympics where they
Yeah.
they get offerings from each
For the
nation
gods.
to be like, oh, we'll put it there.
That'd be so cool. Anyways, continue.
Some other ideas about why Garagos was left around was that he was considered, maybe he was bait. So any hoping to take over the domain of war would come after the open and rash Garagos before they would go after Tempus. At one point, he was not completely consumed by his rage and anger, Garagos, but after his defeat at the hands of Tempus, he became quite brutish and forgetting the restraint he had once and focusing purely on rage and destruction.
Wow, he's a poor loser.
Yeah, especially considering how many hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of years ago that was.
Well, and, not to mention that his domain is literally rage, so I feel like he's not going to take it well regardless.
Yeah. The Red Knight is an interesting case. And actually, she was the original topic for this week, but I made it a larger topic instead, focusing on Tempus and the Exarchs, not just the Red Knight. The Red Knight is the Exarch of Tempus and has a very close relationship with him. He even sponsored her ascension into full godhood. Tempus and the Red Knight had the relationship of a father and daughter, and would often spend time together visiting the battles in Faerun or viewing those of the past. Were you saying something there?
Well, I was going to say, he sponsored her ascension into godhood?
Yeah.
What is that?
So
what does that
pretty
mean?
much... So, as I said, you have to contact the overgod Ao and be like, hey...
Ayo.
Can I thought about doing that joke too.
I know, but it just you can't pass it up,
Thought about so you have to go there and be like, hey, are you okay would you allow me to be a deity? And if you have a deity already saying, hey, yeah, I support them, I think this is a good idea, that's never gonna hurt.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. So it's kind of like he's like a liaison, like a representative for her to join the godhood.
Yeah, or it was more like he's a reference on her application.
Yeah. Yes, I'd like to apply for godhood, please. My references are
this god and that god, and then they're in all of this, Tempus encouraged the people of Faerun to worship her. Some say her ascension was partially to fight against the rage and anger that was Garagos, as she was strategy and battle tactics. Valkyr was, as I said previously, the god of the sailors, the sea, and naval combat. The Red Knight and Tempus both tried to make naval combat more of a focus for him, but he was more focusing on protecting the lives of sailors. Despite these differences, Valkyr did eventually move to the Warrior's Rest, the realm of Tempus. Lastly, we have Uthgar, the Exarch of physical strength. He was the deity of the Uthgard barbarian tribes. Slowly, some of these tribes got pulled into the sway of other gods, lowering Uthgar's power. He lived a life of conquest as a mortal, only to be rewarded in depth with divinity, also sponsored by Tempus. Now, this is what I have on Tempus and his Exarchs for this week. And I just kind of like the idea of, I don't know, it's almost like a little family.
Yeah.
Or like a little group in the Pantheon of these 5 people, the one who's the greater deity, and then these who are the lesser. And they all kind of are, I mean, it's a family. It's a weird little...
Yeah. I mean, they're not...
I just liked it. I liked it.
Yeah, they're just kind of... they're just like domains within his domain, which is really, really interesting and cool.
And so it's kind of like having generals under him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I was thinking,
I love how they set it up as such, where it's like he's the domain of war and stuff, and then these guys are like his generals and his lieutenants and his admirals.
Now with this, I was thinking we could make more gods for our Pantheon, because we created the god last time who did the betraying, who is kind of like the spider god of messages, who's trying to weave the world in knowledge so that he can go everywhere. And so I was thinking we could create a kind of family like this in our own Pantheon.
Yeah, let's do it. That'd be super fun. I can't remember originally what we had decided, but did we want like a big Pantheon or a small Pantheon? I don't remember.
That was like 20, 30.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
A pretty basic size, at least for me.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's your normal size.
Yeah, I like... I think I'm unique in the sense that I love massive pantheons, like really, really big pantheons, but they require so much work. But that doesn't mean I don't put them in my settings because I love really big pantheons. But I think the question that we have to discuss before we even make these is how do we want to break up our godhood? Is it just like are they in my world, for example, it's 5 good gods, 5 bad gods, 5 neutral gods, and then some gods who are kind of on the fringe that don't really have anything to do with the rest. So do we want to break it down into that, or is it just like a big group that all kind of live together and their domains are up to a person's individual idea of what good and bad is?
Okay, I always like to start with a story first.
Okay.
So I always start with these were the 2 gods that started at the beginning. They had child. The child was yada yada. And so it just kind of balloons from there. And based on just kind of the story as it goes, it kind of decides their domain.
Right, and we have to kind of do the reverse, right? We have to flip it on its head because humanoids created the gods. So we kind of have to flip it a little bit upside down with this. Oh,
that's true. Story. There is no story like that in the world.
It's not big creator god number 1 had, and big creator god number 2 had kids, and then, it's not that way at all. So first society, okay, we have to go all the way back. First society forms, we had all these different races that were in this, I think we started in the desert, but either way.
Yeah, we had elves, dragonborns, lizard folk, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So let's think. If society today was completely starting over, what would be the first thing people would worship?
I would say because it's the desert, I would say water.
I'm going to do something different. I'm going to do something completely different that you might like and you might hate.
I hate it.
I'm going to say so much. God of the unknown.
God of the unknown.
So they worship the god of the unknown because they're uncertain of if they're going to get water next season, if they're going to get enough rain next season.
Could I specify it a little more?
Yeah. No, please. This is totally just I'm throwing something out there random just to.
Could we do the blessings of the desert? So it's still wide and varied, and it's still unknown because the blessings could be anything from an individual that helps to water to eventually the catacombs underneath the desert. Remember, there was the kind of large underground home of the creatures underneath.
Right. Yeah, I love that idea. I think that's awesome. Yeah, for sure. So we have a society that forms in the desert, and they start to worship a god of blessings, of the desert, and partially of the unknown, of things that are to come. And what does this god then form into and look like? Is it a storm? Is it like a sandstorm that blows across? What would they picture and see?
I think it's greenery, if you're okay with that. Oh, yeah. Or a cactus.
What if we did like a desert illusion? Like a mirage.
A mirage.
Like it can transform into anything because it's like this mirage image.
Mm-hmm.
And that would kind
maybe
of
that's
show...
like the form it takes. Okay.
That could be interesting. Like it's how it...
I'm going to say, I think what it is it is mirage is kind of what the god looks like when they're in their godly realm, and then they have a thing called an avatar, which is the kind of weakened physical form that they take on.
Right.
And that is I'm going to send you an image. There is I think I've talked about this on the podcast before. I have backed a Kickstarter for a new RPG called The Wild Sea.
Yeah, you talked a little bit about it, I think.
Yeah. And so The Wild Sea is kind of this like post-apocalypse large forest world. And I think, if I remember correctly, one of the playable races in it is a cactus person.
Heck yeah. like Cacturn from Pokemon.
Sure.
The dark grass type originated in Gen 3, one of my favorite Pokemon.
But yeah, I'll post it later. But I think that's what I'm imagining this thing is.
I think I like the idea of it's like godly manifestation in its own realm is like kind of like this like weird shimmering illusion that can shift and make you see whatever you know what it wishes for you to see. But even then, I still like that idea of when it's down on Earth, when it's down on the material plane, it does the same thing. Because I think it'd be really fun if maybe the first time somebody thought to start worshiping something like this is they were like desperate for water. And you know how when in the desert you start seeing mirages and images of like an oasis, and you walk and walk and walk forever to it and you never find it, but because they believed that it was there, they came upon and stumbled upon like the original oasis, right? That because they believed, they saw this mirage and this image that it existed, it like partially formed this god, and then people started believing in all of these different images that they were seeing within the desert, like food and, you know, blessings of the desert.
Yeah.
And these blessings that would show up became a god because, you know, they were seeing these things that actually manifested within the desert. And I think that
I like that. I think
yeah.
I think it starts with that one person, and then they like maybe they found an oasis or they found something that allowed them to survive, and so then when they got back, they began praising whatever this thing was. Like, I found a god and it granted me yada yada yada.
Yeah, well, and maybe this god has different names too, like the ever flowing oasis, or like, you know, like just like all these different names that contribute to different things that people have seen and contributed this god for, right? And started believing that this god was providing. So, you know, like even like a bountiful harvest, even, you know, like all sorts of different things that people were starting to see and believe that this god was doing for them. Now, I think we jump into this is like the matriarch of this little family group that we're creating, right? I think that's what we want to do. And I think what would be interesting is we take nature's blessed, like the desert's blessing, like this image of a mirage as the matriarch, and we break it down into realistic things within the desert that become gods. So like the god of the oasis, okay, is like
Maybe you're gonna be the one that saves me.
No.
It's the god of the oasis. I don't know what to tell you, my guy.
No. Okay, we're not doing a god of the oasis anymore. No. But I think that would be
it's the god of the oasis' like, favorite song, Wonderwall.
Yes. No. Gosh dang it. Oh no. But I think we could even do something like a god of like maybe like, for example, in Egypt, like, you know, the Nile was essentially a god to the Egyptians, you know? And so like maybe there's a river in the desert that becomes a god, for example. Maybe the sun becomes a god because the sun is such an important thing within the desert and such a bad thing within the desert as well. And so all these things start forming underneath this nature's blessing. So the sun becomes a blessing to people.
Now, question about the sun.
Yeah.
Is it how is it treated? Is it treated as an adversary?
I think both. I think it would be interesting, like if
because it could be taken as like, oh well, it's not doing anything like different. It's just existing, and people realize that, and so it's treated as, oh, it's just kind of this force of nature, or it could be seen as it's an antagonist.
See, I think what I would like to do is do a god of the sun and a god of the moon. And these are lesser deities, right? So we have the major, like 20 major deities, and underneath these major deities, we have all these little ones. So that way we have a really big pantheon, but also a really small pantheon.
Yeah.
And I think that like the sun and the moon are like two different gods with underneath the desert's blessing. And these two factions that form underneath them don't really like each other as much, right? So some people think the sun kills and destroys and created the desert, created this barren landscape, whereas some see it as creating wealth and life within the desert. And then some people see the moon as like a relief from the heat of the day, relief from, you know, the problems of the desert. in a solitude and safety that the night and moon gives, and even like a safety that the of light that the moon provides. So I think like those two are part of the same family, but they're kind of at odds with each other. And it can be like seen, especially in early society, and maybe even like maybe even people that lived in those caves, they like come out at night because they're more acclimated to it, and maybe that like,
Well, we have
stems
already
their
said that
worship
the
more.
kind of creatures that live there are all, or at least there's a lot of them that are dragonoid.
Right.
So they're kobolds and such like that. In our world, a lot of reptiles, especially ones that live in the desert, have sand baths. That's how they clean themselves. Maybe they do that at night under the cover of the moon.
Yeah. I think it'd be an interesting take to kind of reverse it, instead of like these lizard-like creatures come out at night instead of in the day to like warm, but instead they come out at night. I think it could be a really interesting take. So I think that would be really fun.
Yeah, it turns
So we
out
have,
they're
like,
actually warm-blooded in our world.
Yeah. I mean, or like even maybe like if, because like Dragonborn can breathe fire and stuff like that, maybe there's like some sort of like elemental energy within their bodies that keeps them warm, and keeps them, going, and so they don't like to be out in the heat. But I think those two would definitely be something that formed, and maybe they like again, they're constantly bickering and fighting with each other, and maybe the society sees the cycle of the moon and the sun as them constantly fighting and winning over each other and losing over each other, as like when the sun rises, that means he's had a victory over in a certain sense of the word, and then when the moon comes out at night, it wins, and then maybe when they're both showing at once, it's like that's a time when they're fighting in there.
No, I think the cycle of sun and moon is always a fight. It's eclipses. That's when there's a victory.
Oh, okay. That would be, I think that'd be very interesting. Yeah. Like whichever one is prevalent. Would be really interesting.
And maybe they like plan out on eclipses. They have like a worship ceremony towards the one that wins.
Yeah, that'd be super cool. It'd be awesome. And then I'm thinking, like with the river, I think there would definitely be a god of the river, right? There would definitely be like a lesser deity that is the river. The river itself is thought of as a god, right? Like there'd even be like, societal ceremonies where like people would be like almost like baptism, I guess. Would be like they would go into the water and like experience, the god firsthand. Like it's one of those gods you can like physically touch all the time. So I think that would be a really fun one too, and also would count under like a nature's blessing / unknown. You never know if the river is going to be dry this year, if it's going to flood and bring abundance. You never know if it's going to flood too much and ruin part of your society, or flood the perfect amount, or not have enough. So I think that's super awesome. And then I love the idea of like an oasis as a god.
Yeah, we all want Oasis to be gods, let's be honest.
Yeah. But that like signifies safety, that signifies like a peace or like a sustainability too. Or like maybe it's the god of the desert travelers because they stop at oases, like that kind of stuff. And that's how that one formed is, these people would stop at oases from in long trades. I think there'd be like a god of money and trade, maybe, because like it would also fall underneath the
what if this god was created earlier than money,
the god of the oasis.
So by the time that the asteroid comes and destroys the kind of roiling energy that creates gods, there was never a god of money. Like maybe it was a god of minerals and they sold minerals, or maybe it was a god of bartering and trade.
Yeah, I think it would be a god of bartering and trade and not of money. I like that, I think, a lot. Like the concept of bartering and trading, which I know we've talked about on the podcast before, but I think I think that's a really fun god concept of like a god of the barter and, society that exists in marketplaces that form to serve and barter as like a religious rite and a religious ceremony. It was really fun.
Maybe
so I love that.
Once money came into being, because there was no god of it, he got actually weaker.
Well, here's my thought too. What if this god comes into existence as like a group who trades and barters, but also as like a peacekeeping group between the sun and the moon. And so it constantly barters, trying to bring peace and a deal between the two, the sun and the moon. That could be really interesting too.
I like that. So it's also it has become, it was barter and trade, and it has grown into also peace at this point.
Yeah, like to come to a deal, to come to terms, and to accept conditions. And so they are constantly trying to like barter and help the sun and the moon, who are constantly bickering. And then you see it parallel in the Pantheon, where like the sun and the moon god are always, lesser deities are always like bickering with each other, always fighting with each other. And then the god of barter and peace and trade and deals is trying to like keep them together. And like, and I even love the concept of like those two are twins. The sun and moon are like twins.
Yeah.
And, this one's trying to just like keep them together and keep them, from killing each other, essentially. I mean, not killing each other, but you get the point.
Yeah.
So I think that would be really fun.
Too much sun and too much moon is not ever going to be a helpful situation.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's a really fun little family dynamic. Do you think there would be like a god of like plants, or a god of like crops or farming, or probably, right? That'd probably be an original one that would form.
It would probably be the god of sustenance.
Okay. Or like bounty.
Or bounty, yeah.
Plenty. Yeah, the god of bounty and plenty. Do you think there would be the opposite that formed as well, where people like indulge in the suffering, like find peace in the suffering?
The
like
god of solace in the pain.
Yeah, like maybe even people would see like, animals starving or dying of dehydration out in the desert, and they, that would correlate directly to probably more so of an evil god, I'd imagine, right?
No, I kind of see it as it is the god that they take solace in during droughts.
What if it's the god of like balance? Because it's balancing everything out within the desert. It's keeping the desert balanced. So there are years where there's drought to keep it balanced, and there are years where it's prosperity to keep it balanced. And we kind of combined them all into one.
No, I kind of want it to be the fact that this one exists and the other one exists, that together they create balance. But it is. So do you think it's another god? Well, no, you already created the god of bounty, or
right.
And so this would be the opposite of that. That would reflect maybe that's like a continual theme in the Pantheon, is warring between two sides that kind of create a balance together.
I think it would be. I think it would absolutely be, because I think one god would form, and then people would start seeing the opposite of something else happening. Well, then there must be a god causing that as well. There must be something causing that as well, and so then another one forms.
Yeah.
And it just kind of steadily builds doing that, and then it just becomes this complicated. You have an over deity, and then a bunch of lesser deities all underneath, like little family units and structures depending on the society, and then they all kind of form this one giant Mount Olympus up in the sky behind the arcane gate, which I think is really fun.
Yeah, I like that. Now, who do the draconic and kobolds and such like that, who do they worship?
Honestly, I think there'd be a god of the sands, and they'd probably worship the god of the sands. Like it's the sands that
sand
keep them
queen.
safe. It's maybe it's even like a giant draconic like sand, dragon.
I think it's something that is never seen. I think it's one of those, like, think of like a horror movie where there's just like that lump in the sand and it moves.
Yeah.
No one's ever seen what it looks like.
Yeah. Yeah.
And maybe it didn't start as the god of the sands. It was just a monster people saw and thought, or it was just like a mirage that they saw on the edge of their periphery of like, oh, that sand moved, didn't it?
Yep.
And it became the god of the sand.
Yeah, exactly. And that would fall perfectly within the over deity of this like mirage of like nature's blessings, and and then it forms into this actual deity that exists because they thought they saw something moving. And I think they'd worship that because it's the sands that keep them safe. It's the sands that, like you were talking about earlier, they clean themselves in. It's the sands that, provide everything for them. And so I think that would kind of form into their deity. I also see Probably like a god of wind or a god of storms even forming, because those are really common in deserts, like sandstorms and stuff like that. Maybe this god of sands is also part of like a god of sandstorms. Like it's maybe one time when the lizard folk were being attacked.
Is there a
by the
god
elves
of
or something,
papyrus?
massive sandstorm. There could be. Yeah,
There's a god of
there could
sands.
be.
Is there a god of
but
papyrus?
They're actually like funny enough though. There actually could be like a god of papyrus or like of different plants and stuff as well. I think could absolutely be a thing. And I know you were making a joke, but I absolutely think that could be a real thing. But yeah, I think maybe like I said, he even encompasses like a god of sandstorms, because maybe like elves were attacking these draconic the draconic beings, and a sandstorm blew in, and they thought it as a message from their god of sands, and so he automatically encompassed that kind of domain as well, and it like saved them, and they were able to escape. I think that would definitely be a thing that existed as well.
Yeah.
Where do you think animals would fall into this?
What do you mean?
Like, would that be under the god of like bounty and prosperity, or is that a completely different domain of like a god of like animals and a god of husbandry or hunting or ranching or anything like that?
That's actually a really hard question.
I don't know. I'd probably put it under bounty, because it kind of all falls in the same thing, and then it would bring balance. So I think it's probably under that. But
I can't think of anything better than that, so I would say yeah, let's go with that.
Yeah, and I think like again, kind of what we should always be thinking about is just like, because our world is kind of flipped upside down, what are the basics that people need and want in a society that would form into a god? We already kind of have a god of like water, which is like the river and like oasis and stuff like that. God of food, which is bounty. Protection and stuff is sands, moon, sun.
The water is also sustenance.
Right. Shelter, or I think people would like. Is there like a god of like the palace? Like, is there like a royalty? Would that form? Would people start thinking that royalty could possibly be? That's happened in history. Happened a lot in history. Would there form a god of like royalty?
I don't.
And like they reside in a grand like.
How terrible do we think these
Hall of the
people are?
desert. What?
How terrible do we think these people are?
I think it probably varies based on
Well, these specific people that we're talking about, the elves or the draconic group?
I don't know. That's a really hard question. I think they wouldn't.
Because if they're terrible,
to
they might have manifested a god of like manifest destiny, like some terrible like we deserve everything.
That's a really good point. Yeah, manifest destiny would be a really a one that would happen for sure. In
If it just needs the right horrible group to create that deity.
Yeah. I think that would absolutely form for sure. That's a really good one. Yeah, I think like a god of, like of right, of like right to rule type thing, I think would be a really common one. And maybe we have several different ones under that kind of branch form. And maybe they even societies that created them. So like the Draconians have one that looks like a Draconian, and the elves have one that looks like an elf,
What the gods look like?
Could be it. No, I'm just like it. I mean, yes, but just in kind of like maybe underneath this god of nature's blessing is in the unknown, multiple gods of like destiny and manifest destiny like form, because each society kind of creates their own. As like maybe like the Draconians believe they should rule over the elves, and the elves believe they should rule over them, and so they kind of like form these different versions of gods that fight each other even in the Pantheon.
Yeah.
Like maybe, or like one would be like the god of like defense, the god of like courage, right? To like withstand an attack. So like maybe the Draconians came up with that concept, and so their god is like the god of like defense and stalwart and courage, and then the elves came up with like a god of like bravery and attack and like destiny, like manifest destiny.
Yeah.
And so kind of these two opposing gods are now fighting each other in the Pantheon at the same time, because these two societies were fighting each other in real life, and it created these gods. I think would be a really, really interesting take as well.
I think it would be. I like the idea of like the bulwark and fortress and protection being the draconians kind of protect their god.
Yep. And then, the opposite from the elves, where it's, bravery to charge in, like a god of the charge, a god of, the hunt even maybe could fall under there, because they believe they're like hunting these creatures and removing them from society, Yeah, I think that's super fun.
Yeah.
And I think that's a pretty good, like little core group, Obviously, we can't
agree.
flesh them out. I don't think obviously we can't flesh them out in an hour's and 30 minutes time, like really flesh them out. But I think that's a really fun starting point of like a little family of gods that formed from society that are bickering with each other and, interacting with each other just like how society did and does,
Well, I think I'm going to cut us off there. This has been episode 80 of Dungeoneer. Thank you all for listening. And if you would like to write to us, talk to us about interesting thing that we created that you used, or just anything, we'd love to hear it at dungeoneered@hotmail.com. If you listen to us on any podcasting app that has ratings and reviews, please write a review. It really helps the show by showing you're engaging in more ways than just one. Anything else you can think of, Aaron?
Heck no.
Okay, well,
Covered them all.
Thank you all for listening. And as I always say, always remember to be the sharpest barrel in the bunch. See you next time.
Gosh, that was so long.